Hi, welcome to the G2 Gallery Podcast. I'm Jared, and today we're talking to one of our photographers, Harvey Freed. Thank you so much for coming in.
Pleasure being here.
And the first question I want to ask you is about your broad traveling. You've captured a lot. You've been to Antarctica.
I have been, yes.
And you photographed there. I've seen that. And then you've been in the country and traveling, and I just learned that you scuba dive, so you're all over the place. So that's fantastic. Were you always like that, even as a kid?
I think I've always been that way. I think from the first time I picked up a National Geographic magazine, I just love traveling. I love the mystery of what's over the next hill, whether it's backpacking or traveling or scuba diving or just being out of doors, basically on the ocean, in the mountains. Being out of doors and being able to capture that has been wonderful for me, and I've had the opportunity really to travel throughout the world. So yeah, I've enjoyed it and photographed it.
So now that you're photographing, sort of, do you feel like you've mastered what you're trying to do, or do you feel like you're like, where do you think you are in that?
No. I think I'll never stop taking workshops. I'll never stop reading those books. There's always something new, some way to work your craft so that you can express yourself in different ways. So no, definitely not mastering it, and I hope I never do.
Yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, when did you first start photographing it as a serious,
My brother-in-law had a wonderful camera when I was 6 years old, and I used to watch him photograph. And my father had a little Zeiss Icon camera that folded out, and I remember looking at that, and when he wasn't there, opening it up and playing with it. And my first little brownie camera when I was probably in the 6th grade, and photographing with that. And mostly that was a matter of just photographing places. And Kodak at that time had a thing called a tri-chem kit, which was you'd get 3 little chemicals and 3 little packages, and you go in the bathroom and you block it out with towels, and you develop this stuff and contact print it. And I just remember so vividly seeing that very first image come up, and you've probably heard this before, and it's just absolutely magic. And then you have to do it again and again. And I think imaging of one sort or another, whether it's through a microscope or a telescope or a camera or underwater, has always been a passion of mine.
What in nature inspires you?
That's what I try to find out every time I'm out in nature, is I'm in a beautiful place, and I know it's a beautiful place, and then the challenge is to somehow simplify that and capture the essence of what makes me stop there and look at it. And it's always a mystery, and sometimes you don't discover it, and sometimes you take an image and you say, yes, that's what it is that stopped me here and made me capture it. And trying to simplify that grandeur down to the essence of what stops you.
Now, when you find a place that stops you in your tracks, is it an overall sense that in your body that this is something that stops you? Is it...
Sometimes you'll walk by and it'll be a pattern.
Sure.
That just whacks you in the head, and you go, oh, look how cool that is. But sometimes it's much more abstract than that. And you're just kind of looking around and saying, wow, this is great. I wish I could tell people how beautiful it is. And you know that if you just take a wide angle camera and take a big snapshot, people are going to see little tiny trees and little tiny mountains and not understand the beauty of it. And that's the challenge, is going from there, looking at the light and figuring out what it is that you can put on a little film or on a sensor that will capture that feeling.
Now, you've sort of covered very different landscapes. Where would you like to go next?
Well, I'll be going to Yosemite in a couple of weeks. I'll be going to the Rockies in a couple of weeks, and in the fall I'll be up the Hudson Valley photographing colors. So I think there's always places to be, but I think my go-to place, especially living in Los Angeles, is always going to be Yosemite. I car camped there when I was a kid. Those were my first landscape photographs. Ansel Adams was my first guru. So it'll always be Yosemite as my go-to place.
Now, what in do you look at different landscapes and say, like, this is something I would love to capture, to make a point about an area or to bring attention to an area? Do you ever set out hoping to like save a land or something like that?
I don't go out with that as a journalistic mission. Sometimes it hits you in the head and you can't walk away from it. I remember being down at the Salton Sea a couple of years ago, and there was a big power plant and there were dead fish rolling up on the shore, and it smelled awful. And you have to say, wait a minute, there's an impact here that I really need to capture and tell people about. So sometimes it hits you in the head. You see mining and tailings, and you see how it's ruined the side of a mountain, and you have to do it. But I don't go out with that as my primary intent.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you ever find yourself in a journalism kind of photo shoot where that takes over?
I think the Salton Sea was one of those areas, but generally not. No, because I don't go to those places that have been despoiled by man. Then I try to actually go to the places that haven't been, the wild places that have been untouched. I don't like to see telephone poles. I really like to see things as pristine as they could be.
Did you go to school for photography?
No, I didn't. I've taken workshops from lots of really great photographers. I just took a workshop in New York just recently. So I've taken a lot of workshops. I've read a lot of books, but no formal university training in it. No.
What are those workshops like? Do you find different workshops that handle specific territories, or?
Well, I go to workshops for two reasons, really. Sometimes, at this point, it's because they're in a location that I want to go to.
Sure.
And sometimes you can go to a spot, if you don't know the location well, you can spin around and really miss the weather, miss the sunsets, miss the sunrises, if you don't really know where to be. So sometimes I'll go there because of the location. Sometimes I'll go there because they're presenting a particular way of photographing that I really feel is a weak area that I want to explore. I'm going to be taking a photographic workshop in Aspen, and it's all going to be about using speed lights out with landscape photography. And it's something that I would like to be able to control light a little bit more. So I take workshops for all different kinds of reasons, and I'm constantly looking for them.
Yeah, when you say do you find, if you don't mind me asking, where do you feel like your strengths and weaknesses are in photography?
I think my strengths are in, as I say, stopping in a place, getting really quiet with that spot, and capturing what someone might say is a classic photograph of that area. Getting down, getting low, getting in close. I think my weakness is, and where I really would want to improve, is controlling light a little bit more. Those evening shots and focusing on some of the smaller aspects out of doors and bringing them out. And that's where I really would love to concentrate my work from now on.
In this part of your life, how have you looked back at your years of photographing and seen progress or change?
Well, you looked at my bio, and I'm a practicing periodontist. I'm practicing a day a week. Mm-hmm. And up until a couple of years ago, I was practicing full-time and teaching, and it didn't give me a lot of time to get out in the field and really work with things. So these last 5 years have really allowed me to really focus much more, take more workshops, read more books, spend more time. And so your question is, how has my progress been? And I think if I look at my photographs 8-10 years ago, they're significantly different than what they have been for this last 5 or 6 years. I think prior to that, they were more about location. Now they're more about the sense of that location, the feeling of that location, the emotion involved in that location.
Okay. So then the compositions really come out to you and give you a sense. Have you been always an observer as a person?
As opposed to a mover and a shaker?
Sure, yeah. I mean, some people go through and aren't as observant. Because, it takes a little bit of a detachment to, kind of look at something.
I think the thing about photography that's so wonderful is it forces you to be an observer. Mm-hmm. You don't just walk by and let things wash over you. If you're there with a camera, the negative is sometimes you miss the big picture. The positive is it forces you to continually look at your surroundings and say, what do I like about this? What do I not like about this? What do I want to communicate? So I think it's made me a better observer. And when I was photographing with large format, I was even a much better observer because you really don't waste shots then.
Right.
You really need to be contemplative about what you're doing.
You've worked on film?
I've worked in film, I've worked on medium and large format, I've done zone technique. I have ultimate respect for those great photographers that do that. It's a daunting enterprise.
Sure, it is. It's tough. I mean, you're shooting in large format, and I mean, it fits your photography because your photography really takes up it's a massive subject that you try to cover in all your different exhibits and all your different what's the word I'm looking for? All the different series. That's what I was trying. Is that you take over such like massive lands and formations. When you see certain kinds of rocks or certain sort of like water beds or whatever the case may be, does it give you a sense of perspective on this planet?
Yeah, I think it does. There were two quotes, if I can remember them. There was a quote by Stephen Hawking, and I'm just paraphrasing, just basically, we're pond scum on a tiny planet in a corner of the universe, and we're virtually nothing. And then you have to counterpoint that with Hamlet's, what a piece of work is man. And so somewhere between, we're wonderful in perspective and introspective, and we're nothing, and somewhere between that, you kind of have to find where you are and capture something in the middle of that.
And you try every day to get to that, or every week, or every month, or...
I try to pinch myself every now and then when I don't do that and allow myself to do that. I used to do a lot of astrophotography, and you get very focused on very technical things, on your sensor, where your telescope is pointed. And sometimes you forget to stand back and just look up at the sky and say, wow, this is really beautiful.
And when you photograph, when you were photographing, like astrophotographing, did that, like, what did you notice photographing that? Like, did it all encompass you? Was it one spot you were focusing on? I mean...
Well, interestingly, just like with all kinds of photography, there's a lot of little specialties in astrophotography. I enjoyed photographing galaxies and nebula. Other people enjoyed photographing planets. So lots of, different, there's lunar photographers and guys who photograph sunspots. So all different kinds of things. I was fascinated with galaxies and nebula, and just the wonderment of their distance and how many stars there are and how tiny we are, and yet we can still capture in one way or another that distant bit of light.
Sure. I mean, that makes perfect sense. Now, like I said, you've been photographing for a while. One of the questions I always ask an artist coming in is advice they'd give to themselves at a younger age or a younger photographer. And what advice would you give someone who wants to really dig their feet into the earth and discover what there is to photograph?
Well, there's a saying, like a camera points two ways. And, not only are you photographing out, you're explaining what's inside you. And I think the first thing, as important as all the technical stuff, and that's simple. I mean, you just need to learn the craft. But just to figure out what it is you want to communicate, what it is that you want to say to people, and then head in that direction.
What is it that you want to communicate and say to people?
If I could paint, I would do that. If I could write poetry, I would do that. My third grade teacher told me I couldn't do either of those things, and so that kind of stuck with me.
Yeah.
So what I would like to communicate, as with all, I think, art, is a message about what's important to me, and what's important to me is the beauty of the outdoors. That's what I want to communicate.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for coming in and doing this podcast with me. I really appreciate it. And you can listen to more podcasts on our iTunes page or on our website. This is Jared from the G2 Gallery. Tune in, we'll have more podcasts coming to you. And once again, thank you, Harvey.
Thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm. All thoughts expressed in this interview are that of the interviewee and not of the G2 Gallery.